Hey, listeners. Today I welcomed for the second time my friend, Dr. Andrew Jagim. He previously appeared on the podcast with his colleague, Joel Ludke, and I will link their previous episode in the show notes. Dr. AJ is the Director of Sports Medicine Research at the Mayo Clinic Health System in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and also an Associate Professor of Family Medicine. And he has a Ph.D. in Kinesiology with an emphasis on exercise phys from Texas A&M. Basically, AJ is the bee's knees. Super smart guy, super personable. I love collaborating with AJ, and I was so glad to have him on the podcast again. We really dug into the physiology of training in firefighter gear. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and please give it a rating and a review and share it with someone you know will enjoy it. Have a great day. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hello, listeners. It's AZ with the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast, and I am back once again with my friend, Dr. Andrew Jagim. Please say hello to the listeners.
Hello, listeners.
This is number 2 appearance on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. It's very exciting, and you know what, listeners? I'm going to be honest with you. I really effed up. 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to record in person, and we were all set at ACSM Midwest, and somebody, not mentioning any names, forgot the power cord for the podcast recorder, so it was a disaster. But I do want to mention we went out for dinner. Now, tell the listeners, what time was that reservation?
About 4:30, 5 o'clock.
Yeah, it was 5. Don't make it weird. It was 5 o'clock. There are not very many people that I can talk into going out to dinner with me at 5 o'clock. So this man is a good sport. So we went out, we had a nice dinner at St. Elmo's Steakhouse. Yes, St. Elmo's Steakhouse. And then we went back to the hotel. We found a conference room, and then unfortunately, no power cord. So disappointing. But so we have this symbiotic relationship. Dr. AJ teaches me exercise phys stuff, and I teach him fire stuff. And so before we get into the lightning round questions, I want to ask you, AJ, if you noticed something. When we went out to dinner and got to our reservation, which was at 5 o'clock, where did I sit?
You sat with your back to the wall, across the table.
Facing the what?
Door, exit.
Why? Do you know why?
I didn't even think about it until you just asked it now.
Hypervigilance. First responders have this hypervigilance thing. We can't help it. It's not our fault, but every time we go somewhere, we have to be facing the doors, and we're also assessing the exits. It's so weird. So there, I taught you something more about firefighters. Yeah. You're welcome.
There we go.
You're welcome.
Good to know.
Good to know. All right. Since last time you were on with Joel, I did not do the lightning round question. So we're going to do it this time. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. First question. Who is Dr. Andrew Jagim?
I am an exercise physiologist and sport nutritionist that is in the sports medicine department for Mayo Clinic Health System. And I work primarily in a research capacity, but I also see patients in the clinic for just kind of general consults. Anyone who's seeking help for exercise, nutrition kind of strategies, whether it's for sport or just everyday life, they're training for a marathon or kind of anything in between there. So I like to claim as being both a researcher and a practitioner when I can be, to try to toe both those lines.
Love it. And side question, we're already going down a rabbit hole. Is this an insurance-based model, or is it a cash-based, or is it both?
Everything related to my services is all cash-based. And so it's good and bad. We try to keep the cost down and make it affordable. And then once people kind of understand that, they realize you know, the upside there of kind of bypassing the insurance route. And the other nice thing is we don't require any physician referrals. So anyone could just call and say, hey, I want to come in and do a DEXA body comp scan, and I can put them on the schedule tomorrow and we can get that done. They don't have to see their primary care and then get a referral and then submit prior auth. And so you eliminate a lot of that front end stuff, and we kind of have a direct access model by setting it up that way.
Lowering the barrier to entry is one of my favorite things to talk about. So that's amazing.
Yep.
Question 2, what sets your soul on fire?
I would say misinformation. I can't stand people just spouting out stuff that they don't really know anything about. And the fact that they are so confident about it is really what just pisses me off. I'm also amazed. Like, how can someone be so dumb and so confident about what they're speaking on at the same time? It's just, sometimes I wish I had that confidence, but as I think I saw Lane Norton talking about this the other day, you can tell a true expert when they use words like we think, there's a lot of evidence supporting this. This is a strong hypothesis at the moment. Most of the evidence suggests this. Experts don't use people like, I have figured out the secret. I'm the only one with the answers. Buy my book to get the magic recipe. Like, if you hear those catchphrases, someone's just slinging BS at you, and they likely aren't an expert. They're just an expert in marketing and sales, not science and actual information.
Oh, my heart. You are speaking to my heart. Because all of these discussions are very nuanced. Even if you are an expert in something, it totally depends. Oh, can we just take a moment, everyone? Let that sink in. All right. Last question. How are you changing the world?
I like to think by combating some of that misinformation that lights my soul on fire. So trying to get some of that good information out, but then at the same time, trying to put my practitioner hat on and kind of my realist hat on as well, and trying to just take what we kind of know from a scientific perspective, but then how can we modify that to actually make it tangible for people, even if you have to make sacrifices along the way. Here's our perfect diet, but here's one that people may actually adhere to on a consistent basis. So just trying to help people narrow that gap a little bit. And then, really, again, doing what I can to combat the misinformation that's out there along the way.
And you alluded to this gap that exists, and it's huge. It's the great research that's going on in fire now, and then the end user, like, the gap is so big, it's not getting there. And so that's why I love the presentations that we've done together, because I give the fire side, like, here's the reality, and you give the science side, and people can meet somewhere in the middle. So,
and I think it's nice too that we're doing it to some of these audiences that you can tell there hasn't been that presence very much before. I think it's changing within those organizations, but it's just nice to see new content that we're kind of bringing to some of those organizations. Because I think, as we even mentioned in our previous conference that we were speaking at, there's a lot of people in those rooms that could really make a difference in that field. There's just, they maybe hadn't thought of it up until, people like us kind of get in front of them and just say, hey, you guys could bring a lot of your expertise to this subset of individuals. Let's just figure out a way to how to do it is really the biggest question.
I mean, we're pretty much amazing superheroes. I mean, that's what I heard you just say.
I think that's what the feedback was from the conference too.
Right? So we were supposed to present together at International Society of Sports Nutrition, and I had surgery, so I did a little video. We presented together at ACSM Midwest a couple weeks ago, and then we're slated to present at Texas ACSM. So I think we got the world tour going.
Mm-hmm. I think. Good time to go to Texas too in February. So
Agreed. I think that's going to be a fun conference. So, well, AJ and I had thrown around a couple of ideas of what to talk about. And when we were sitting in the conference room in Indianapolis with that giant fan, I mean, I think it's probably a blessing in disguise. I think that fan would have just been too loud for the recording anyway, but we thought, what can we really talk about that could be helpful and actionable and meaningful for the people listening? And I was telling AJ about this trend of doing physical fitness training in turnout gear. And so he actually hadn't heard too much about it. He hadn't been exposed to too much of it, but I showed him a few videos and, showed him that it was actually happening. So I want to talk about a couple of things. The first one, let's talk about getting used to training in heat, because these rooms that we're entering that are on fire can be 200 to 300 degrees at the floor, 1,000 degrees at the ceiling. So there really is a necessity to be heat acclimated. But I'm just going to turn the mic over to you, AJ, and just let's pretend for a moment that there is nothing in our gear that is a concern for our health. Let's just pretend it's pajamas or something like that. What are the shortcomings of training in the gear for getting ready to perform in heat? The mic is yours.
I would say one of the biggest limitations of doing that is you're compromising your ability to get what we could just say is the optimal workout. Like, let's say instead of giving 100% of what you're supposed to do, whether that's reps you're supposed to hit, a certain pace on a treadmill, whatever modality of exercise you're doing, when you're wearing the gear, you're pretty likely sacrificing your ability to hit some of those standards or that rep set or whatever. So you're kind of shortchanging yourself in terms of the quality of that workout that you could be doing if you were in just regular gym attire or fitness clothing. And so if you do that once, maybe not a big deal. But if you're training that way every single time, you're getting 75% worth of the, again, quality of workouts or total work that you could be doing across a week or a month or an entire training cycle. That because of that, you're not likely eliciting the same kind of level of adaptation that you could have accomplished, again, if you were giving kind of full effort or nailing every single of those workouts without being hindered by the additional gear. And I don't think you, again, just by training 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is within that gear, I don't think that's going to be enough anyway to elicit any of that heat acclimation that you would, ideally be looking for to kind of better prepare the body in those types of, situations where you are in 200, 300 degrees. Anytime you're trying to adapt to an environment, you kind of have to be in that environment all the time. When you hear people going to these altitude camps for like runners, they're living in the mountains for weeks, months while they're running and they're training in the altitude, but they're also living in the altitude to really kind of maximize that adaptive response. Same thing with the heat. One of the things that bugged me when I lived in Texas, the football teams would always practice inside. And I get that, but you kind of got to be outside a little bit too to maximize that acclimation, process. So it's always kind of a give and take when you're talking about how can we best, prepare our body or get it to adapt to that environment that we're going to be in.
So admittedly, you are the exercise physiologist. I am the firefighter. I honestly don't know the answer to this question. What is the difference between driving my heart rate up simply because I'm hotter and driving my heart rate up because I am running faster or working harder? Physiologically, what's the difference?
When your heart rate goes up in response to exercise and activity, and we know it's kind of a linear relationship, the harder you're working, the more the heart rate goes up. We have a lot of different sensors within the body that initiate that response. Some of them are within the muscles themselves. When they detect that rapid contraction, send signals to the heart, and brain to then ramp up heart rate and things like that. We have same type of receptors within our blood vessels, within our vasculature, and even kind of within the heart itself that operate in this way to keep heart rate up to then get more blood flow out to the tissues, more oxygen delivered, etc. And if we just look at heat in isolation, when we're in a warm environment, let's say we go into a sauna, we're not exercising, but we're still in a obviously hot and humid environment, heart rate goes up to kind of dissipate heat. It's just our body working to try to get heat out or, cool ourselves off, mostly through the evaporative cooling process. So the more blood flow we can redirect to the skin levels, we can sweat more, we can hopefully, experience that evaporative cooling effect that would then cool us off. But when you're in a sauna, it's not really going to happen. You're always just going to be hot in there. So they're kind of being driven by different mechanisms. And then obviously when you combine both of those together, the heart rate and stuff is really going to go up if you were to exercise in a sauna, which thankfully most people don't, other than maybe our UFC and wrestling friends out there in the world trying to cut weight. But there, the risk is that your heart rate is going to go up even more because you're increasingly becoming dehydrated. So as we sweat, as we lose fluid, plasma volume, which kind of makes up the majority of our blood volume, starts to decrease. And when that happens, blood flow could go down unless something happens to kind of counteract that. And that's where elevation in heart rate kind of comes into play. So heart rate is going to be even higher when we're exercising in warm conditions because of that dehydration effect. And so even if you were to maintain the same pace, let's say we brought a treadmill into the sauna, we're running at 7 miles an hour, our heart rate's going to slowly drift upwards throughout that run because we're losing more plasma volume as we become more dehydrated. The heart tries to counteract that effect by beating faster, so the heart rate starts to drift upwards, and that's just putting more cardiovascular strain on the body. So that 7 mile an hour pace feels a heck of a lot harder half hour in just because you're dehydrated, because your heart's having to work that much harder.
And just because it feels harder doesn't mean the training effect is going to be more beneficial. Am I correct?
Correct. If anything, it could be worse from a purely training perspective because you might have to eventually drop that pace down or lower the amount of weight you're lifting or adjust your rep schemes because you can't hit your target goals because you're dehydrated or you're overly fatigued or whatever the case may be.
Love it, love it. So what would be a better method or approach for someone who says, Illinois gets hella hot in July and it's super humid. So someone who comes to me and says, AZ, I have to get ready for this heat to perform in the heat. What kind of an approach might be better for them?
I think occasional workouts in the heat would be okay to do. And then also spending time out in the heat as well throughout the day. So not just working out 20 minutes outside, feel like you check that box and then go sit in air conditioning the rest of the day. Because that's not going to be enough to initiate any of those kind of heat acclimation adaptations that would be required to be beneficial. I don't think you'd hardly get anything at all by doing that. So maybe some of those conditioning workouts to do outside just so you are almost just used to it more than anything. I think there's, not to use the mental toughness kind of catchphrase, but I think there is something to just being used to being in that type of a setting where you're hot, you're miserable, you don't feel well. So you just kind of know what it feels like. But then again, spending time outside would also be important to truly kind of get some of that adaptive response over time. And then the other thing really is in the moment, you need to look at not necessarily from a workout perspective, but the best you can to maintain hydration would be very important for those actual, response calls and things like that, is to make sure you are already hydrated and not dehydrated, because then you're already setting yourself up for an uphill battle walking into that fire already slightly dehydrated.
It's interesting. I have this ongoing fight with my crew because they want to set the air conditioning at like 66 in the summer, but then in the winter, they want to set it at the heat at like, I don't know, 70 or 72. And so it's, first of all, it's interesting because it's the perspective of the outside versus the inside.
Yeah.
But I think some of these people that work out in their gear to heat acclimate then simply just strip off their gear and come veg out in the air conditioning and get comfy. So I think they're missing a little bit. They're missing a piece of it there. So
Yeah.
I think the other thing, I set you up for this question by saying, let's pretend that the gear had nothing, there's nothing bad in the gear. We also have to consider that the gear contains not only products of incomplete combustion from fires when it hasn't been properly deconned, and also the PFAS or forever chemicals, which we're finding is they're causing cancer in our firefighters too. So there's that reason to stay out of the gear, and then
Yeah.
there's the reason saying that the training isn't effective anyway.
And it's not the exact same situation, but I think we even chatted about this in Indy. But there, for a time, there was a large camp of people, mostly in the endurance sport world, that really believed in like fasted training to kind of maximize some of the like bioenergetic and kind of mitochondrial adaptations by doing so, because you're forced to use fat as a fuel source more, and the thought is that you could become more metabolically efficient, which then hopefully come race day could be a performance benefit to you. But what they kind of found was that people who trained fasted, they couldn't hit the same training intensities that they were supposed to because their gas tanks on empty. And so they had to down regulate their training intensities for the day, so that over time you have multiple subpar workouts because you're always training on an empty stomach, no fuel. And then again, over time, they didn't get the same level of adaptation that the people who were fully fueled, given 100% effort for every training session, they got better over time because each training was that much better or that much higher quality.
I have two things to say about that. The first thing is, if you want to see me homicidal, ask me to train fasted. And the second thing is, I guess we have to invite perceived exertion into the conversation, because just because the training session feels harder to me, whether that is because I'm dehydrated, I'm overheated, I'm underfueled, I'm under recovered, just because it feels harder doesn't mean that the intensity is higher necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of whatever the reason for it being harder is, just because you're sweating during a workout doesn't mean you were working hard. It just means it could have been warm in the gym that day. So that's not a great barometer of how good you were training or what your workout looked like. It's a matter of what the temperature was more than anything.
Oh, let's go down a rabbit hole since you said that. What is a better barometer of training efficiency, 1 or 2 or 10, whatever you have? How can we gauge that training efficiency or effectiveness?
In isolation, it would depend on what type of training we're doing. If it's a weight training session versus like you're trying to go out for a run one day. And then I think too, looking at within the context of what your normal workouts look like. So if usually I can squat this for 10 reps, it's about an RPE of a 9, out of 10. It's usually pretty taxing. Then all of a sudden one day you can't even get 5 reps. And so clearly something's off that day. You could have slept like crap. You're hungover. You didn't eat very well that morning or the day before. Up all night with kids. Like there's a lot of reasons in real life that could contribute to that. So that would be one way. Like you're just not hitting your target reps or your target pace that is normal for you for a given day. But if you don't have that background information or that context, we've kind of mentioned some of the ways that they're almost more of measuring exercise intensity rather than efficiency. Like we've already said, the RPE scale is a good way to subjectively gauge again, more of your effort level or the intensity level more than, how quality of a session that is. Things like heart rate are good to use in more endurance type, workout sessions. We know, we can kind of calculate someone's heart rate, target heart rate zones, and which one they're in, depending on what kind of adaptation they're seeking. Yeah, there's no real clear answer to that. The efficiency part, other than, what are they normally doing? What was the target, intensities or goals for that particular session? Or, what are we using to gauge their intensity level or effort?
Would it be accurate to summarize the talk thus far to saying just because you're hot, sweaty, and tired doesn't necessarily mean you've had an effective training session?
Yeah, absolutely. It could mean it's just warm out and you're hungover and you haven't done that workout in a while. Like, yeah, that thing is going to be hard. You're going to be sweating. You're not going to feel good. Doesn't mean it was a quality training session. It just means you were sweating and it was hard for that day.
Yes, I agree. And you know what? I'll use myself as an example. I had a very, very good session at physical therapy today, but man, I didn't sleep last night. And so I was sweating so much and I was so hot. I know it was a good training session, but I should not have been that tired. My heart rate shouldn't have been that high. But just because it was that high, I didn't then say, hey, that was the best training session ever.
Yeah.
So
And in the strength conditioning world, there's, training programs where they use like velocity based training and kind of an auto regulation approach to a person's programming, knowing that you're going to get those outside influences that just, let's just say, lower a person's readiness level for the day. And so if you see that in the kind of a live training session, if bar velocity starts to trend downwards, or again, they can't hit target rep schemes that they normally should be able to, you just make adjustments for that day so you can still try to get a quality workout session in, yet accommodating for life, because it's going to happen. So that's kind of what's done in a lot of strength conditioning settings. I think it just takes a bit of art and science from a coach's perspective to make those adjustments, and then also a level of trust with the athlete or your client, knowing they're not just dogging it because they're lazy and they want to get out of working out for the day. Those are harder situations to deal with. That's more of a culture problem than it is a programming problem.
And listeners, I'm going to actually drop the link to Sarah Johnson's episode. She was way, way, way back in January 2023, but Sarah is she's a beast. She's a power lifter, an Olympic weightlifter, and now a strongwoman competitor, but she trains with Travis Mash and he does a lot of velocity-based training. And he really programs her based on bar speed. And if Sarah hasn't slept, she's a firefighter. If Sarah hasn't slept, her bar speed is not adequate. And he changes the programming. So I will drop the link in the show notes. Speaking of weight training. So weight training is something else that I have seen firefighters doing in gear. And most of it is CrossFit style weight training. So snatches for reps and things like that. I don't see a lot of maxing out on the deadlift, some, but not a lot. So let's speak to potentially the challenges or the barriers to doing weight training, resistance training, while wearing structural firefighting gear.
I can't speak from personal experience on this one. I got to imagine there's challenges with, form and technique and range of motion. I got to imagine some of those are limited when you're in gear, and kind of just having those, again, limitations from a clothing perspective rather than anything else. And then just if that's throwing off form and technique, you're obviously at higher risk for, potential injury with some of those, or again, not getting the same quality of training in that you otherwise could if you had proper, attire in. That's why most people, I think, like gym clothes, even when they're not working out, because they're very comfortable. They're easy to move around in. That's what they're designed for. And so I would think that's always the ideal clothing or apparel to wear in such situations. Because again, otherwise you're, in my opinion, compromising the quality workout that you could get in.
First off, let's talk about athleisure. Athleisure is a thing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't gotten on that train yet, you need to get on that train. But the pushback and the argument that I hear is I need to get used to moving in my gear. And I say, yes, you absolutely do. And arguably, deadlifting in your gear, I mean, you probably actually will be deadlifting in your gear at some point, because picking up a large patient or a heavy object on the fire ground is deadlifting. So arguably, maybe deadlifting in your gear isn't so ridiculous. But I always say, do your strength training, do your resistance training in your athleisure, and then go do some freaking job tasks that actually apply to fire ground performance. And the example I use is that the football players aren't bench pressing in their full pads and helmet and everything, but there's a mismatch somewhere. They don't quite understand the analogy and how it applies. Can you help me with that explanation at all?
That was the exact analogy that popped into my mind, is when you see athletes in more like traditional team sport settings doing strength training for their sport, they're not wearing their sports equipment in the weight room. They're not wearing their football gear. They're not wearing hockey equipment in there. You're in the weight room to do everything you can to get stronger and more powerful. And that means wearing the right clothes, using the right form, using the right program, giving full effort, doing what you can in that situation to maximize strength and power development or muscular endurance, whatever the training goal is. And then, as you said, if you want to get better at more job specific tasks, go practice doing those job specific tasks, and sure, wear the same equipment that you normally wear on duty when you're doing those. Don't try to mishmash the two of them and kind of, in my opinion, half-ass both. Same thing, like when you respond to a call, you wouldn't wear your athleisure wear there. That's the time to wear your equipment because that's the job that you're doing. Dress accordingly, do what you need to do. When you're in the weight room, you have a job to do there, do what you need to do. And then if you want to get better at the other thing, train or practice it in the way it's designed to be.
I'm thinking about, as usual, I'm thinking about a meme, and it's like, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And now all of a sudden I'm in my battalion chief's office dressed as a Wonder Woman or something like that. But I think we always need to measure risk versus reward. And so let's say you have a team of throwers, like you're coaching track and field, you have throwers. And for some reason, unbeknownst to my brain, you decide we need to get these guys more aerobically fit, which really doesn't even make sense, but hear me out. So you drive these guys out 3.5 miles outside of town and say, run back into town. Like, this is your solution. We're going to get them more aerobically fit. That's a huge risk for very little reward with that athlete. And to me, it's the same thing with firefighters doing pull-ups or airdyne bike or rowing or whatever they're doing in their gear and an air pack. It's a huge risk for little to no reward. And the other thing that I see this all the time. Tremendously unfit firefighters decide, which is fabulous, they decide, I need to make a change. I need to get in shape. I need to take care of myself. So instead of starting with walking and some body weight work, they're wearing their turnout gear while doing a CrossFit workout. And it's like, and of course, they make it 3 days and they're like, this is effing miserable. This is terrible. I'm quitting.
Yeah. That would be
So,
like instead of starting with a couch to 5K program, you just go do a triathlon and and think that's going to work well.
yes, oh my gosh, thank you for mentioning that because that was what we wanted to talk about in Indy. The couch to 5K for firefighters who are very unfit. So potentially they're overweight, potentially they're cardiovascularly less than optimal, potentially they're not strong, potentially their body, potentially there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
But now we want to go couch to bare ass minimum and get them started and keep them going. What would you tell those people?
Kind of even like what you were saying earlier, it depends on what specific issues they may have and kind of where they're coming from or what they've been doing prior to that. Because whether it's firefighters or not, a lot of people who've been sedentary or deconditioned, they have a lot of pain oftentimes. They have movement restrictions, range of motion issues. And so sometimes you have to kind of work on those along the way. That's one thing Joel and some of our other sports med professionals are good with is, trying to get them out of pain because you oftentimes just get that immediate kind of positive feedback from that person. Like, oh, now all of a sudden I don't hurt as much. It's more enjoyable to go run or go do a strength workout or whatever, because that may have been one of the reasons why they're overweight and out of shape is because it hurt to exercise, which I can't blame them. And so that might be first thing to address is like, are there some immediate things we could maybe work on to try to get them out of pain, address some of those mobility issues? And then it's as you're, maybe even doing some of those things, it's starting to incorporate just more advanced workouts that still keep them out of that pain or minimize that pain and discomfort as much as possible. Because again, if you just ramp up the intensity, if you have them go run 5 miles, you've probably seen this person. Like, you drive by them, they're on the sidewalk, they're just laboriously running. They look awkward. It's not a smooth pace. You could tell they're in pain and hurting. You kind of want to just pull over and be like, you don't have to do that. There's other ways to exercise that don't hurt, whether it's on an elliptical, on a bike, swimming. So finding a mode of exercise that doesn't hurt them, I think, is a great starting point. And there's so many options. Again, people think it's either running or doing CrossFit. There's a lot of other things we could try. If it's body weight exercises, again, if it's an elliptical, if it's a bike, if it's machine work in the weight room, it doesn't always have to be free weights and barbells and kettlebells. There's some machines that you may want to start with to develop those motor patterns, to blow the dust off those muscles and joints that you may have not used in a couple of years, and just kind of get those early adaptations out of the way. Because again, you'll probably have some early soreness, delayed onset muscle soreness, some of those things that are tough as you ease back into working out. But again, starting small with some of those things, doing them in a safe type of way, and one that doesn't make the situation worse and make them hurt more. And then you just kind of go from there and start increasing the intensity, advancing to more advanced exercises, whether it is doing, some free weight stuff, or if you want to do CrossFit, if that's the goal, we can find a way to either modify the workouts there to, again, kind of get the best of both worlds, or whatever, their exercise modality of choice is. That's something that we try to do with our local department is, if they don't necessarily want to do the program we're sending, that's okay. Let us know what type of things you do enjoy doing, or what kind of home gym you have, or do you work out at the Y? And we could try to develop some, program modifications to help meet you in the middle a little bit. So we still think you're getting, the training effect that we're looking for, yet you're still doing the type of workouts that you enjoy, that you're going to do consistently, because that's always a big, detail there. If we could send the perfect workout, but if they don't like it and they're not going to do it, what's the point? So that's where I put my realism hat on, and again, modify things as needed to try to meet in a little bit to get someone to enjoy exercise, that they're going to do it consistently, and still try to get that same training benefit that we're going for.
You said some of my favorite words, meet them where they are. So critical. I wrote something down while you were talking, and you were talking about them being in pain, having range of motion issues. So back to the gear. We're right back to the gear. The gear does limit our range of motion. The air pack limits our range of motion even more. And for me, the helmet limits my range of motion because the brim hits my air bottle. So arguably, that would be yet another nail in the coffin for why we shouldn't put that restrictive gear on and try to do a training session, because it's limiting our range of motion that's probably already limited. So it's sort of re-emphasizing that restricted range of motion. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, and I think I'm not a biomechanist, but I got to imagine that air pack on the back is thrown off the center of gravity, and so all of the joint kinematics are going to change because of that oddly placed weight on the back. And I know, again, when you're responding to a call, you're going to be wearing it. So that's where, again, just trying to do more of those task-specific exercises outside of the weight room are still probably a good idea. Just don't try to combine both things, because then you're compromising what you're doing.
So we're getting cardiovascularly fit, or we're getting strong, or we're getting mobile, or we're doing job task training. And the juice is worth the squeeze on the job task training to have the gear on, because we have to do those tasks in our gear.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good summary.
And those mistakes happen a lot. Like I see people misuse exercises a lot. Like they'll try to do box jumps to failure or snatches to failure. Like those are exercises that are meant to develop explosive power, and speed, not necessarily a conditioning activity. So if you want to do conditioning, that's fine. There's a lot of great tools available to do it. If you want to develop speed and power, there's, again, tools to develop that. Don't try to mix match the two, because then you're just compromising what you're getting out of them.
Let's start some controversy. I'm all about the controversy. The burpee. The burpee. So
it's a good way to get people tired, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, is it a conditioning exercise? Is it a power exercise? Is it a filler for lazy coaches? What is the burpee?
Yeah, filler / you could probably say it might be a conditioning exercise. I don't know.
A lot of controversy with the burpee, but hey, if you're going to do burpees, please not with your gear on and not with your air pack on. Yeah. There's no reason.
And Joel and I have this conversation a lot, because I'm not going to call out businesses, but there's a lot of local places that do like boot camp style group workout sessions. They're very popular. People love them, but people are just going there to get tired. They're not necessarily going there to get better. And that's always my criticism of them, because they're not individualized. There's not really a lot of progression. It's just, let's spin the wheel and see what exercises we're doing today, and let's just do a bunch of them together until people are really tired and sweaty. And voila, we accomplished our goal for the day. It's like, again, anyone can make them tired. Not everyone can make them better. And that's the difference between a good coach and a bad coach, in my opinion.
I had a crew member that used to work on my crew. Great guy. Awesome firefighter. But I told him he can no longer set up our workout, because his thing was, okay, we're going to do 30 seconds of work and 10 seconds of recovery, and we're going to go 10 rounds. I'm like, what is this? This is terrible.
And again, that's just because people think being tired means you got a good training session in for the day. And I usually add the caveat of any movement's usually better than no movement. So I don't want to, totally downplay exercise, but you're just moving around and getting tired. You're not necessarily getting better. And as tactical athletes, I think the goal should be to get better, get stronger, get better movement abilities, get more endurance, not just get tired 3 days a week and think you're just checking those boxes.
I love that summary, because I kind of use the same one. Like, would I love you to have a periodized strength and conditioning program where you were working towards a specific goal? I would love that. But if not, can you just please move your carcass 4 to 5 times a week? So yeah, it's a great message. All right, AJ, we're coming up on 45 minutes. is there any topic or rabbit hole that we should have gone down, or any soapbox you want to jump onto?
I feel like we've jumped on some good ones already here today.
I know, we're all about soapbox. Okay, let's talk about steak.
Oh, yeah, that was a great one that night.
It was such a good steak. Okay, first of all, I had the shrimp cocktail, which I think I burned off all of the tissue on the inside of my nose.
Yeah,
But
they
St.
are not
Elmo's,
kidding when they say spicy cocktail sauce.
holy hell, that was so good. I myself had the filet, and I went with rare, and it was lovely. And then what did you have?
I think I did the ribeye that night.
I think you did too. And then was yours medium?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you were looking at the menu, what were you looking at in terms of, were you aiming for protein grams or just deliciousness?
I would say a mix between deliciousness and getting as much bang for my buck as I could to maximize that slab of beef that was coming on the plate that night.
And I ordered asparagus and it was nice, but after the fact, I looked at your loaded baked potato and I was like, I missed out.
I had been driving a good chunk of that day, so I hadn't really eaten much for lunch. So I was trying to go all out for my dinner then.
Yeah, that was. If you are ever in Indy, I'm sure most of you have been to FDIC. If you're ever in Indy, you need to go to St. Elmo's Steakhouse. It was lovely. It was wonderful.
Yep. Go at 5. It's not overly crowded.
And also, I had a reservation, but we probably didn't need one.
Yeah.
But by 6, it was truly busy.
It was, yep. We wouldn't have got in at that time.
It was truly busy. All right. And then last topic. I don't think we have ever talked. Do you have a dog?
I do. We had 3 a couple years ago. Now we're down to 1. So
okay.
we have a little lonely beagle at home.
A lonely beagle. Okay. How old is your beagle?
He's 14. He's an old man.
Wow. Okay. And what is his name?
Riggins.
Okay. Well, most of my friends send me pictures of their dog on like weekly, monthly basis. So you do need to get on that routine. So just send me. Oh my gosh. He's showing me a picture. Oh, he looks so cute. Okay.
That's him. Named after Tim Riggins from Friday Night Lights, if people are curious.
All right. Also, listeners, if you aren't aware, I am very much a dog person, but I don't have a dog. So please, messages with pictures of your dogs, Instagram, DMs, text messages, just pictures of your dogs are always appreciated. AJ, I will put your contact information in the show notes if anyone wants to shout you out. And otherwise, I'm sure we'll talk sometime next week about something related to research.
Yeah, I got more questions to throw your way, so I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Amazing. You are the best. I am so grateful for you. And I guess AZ and AJ are definitely out.
See you later.
Bye.